Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and I just want to let you know that this is the space and the place where we get real about some real things. So, as you know, we're looking for your support. If you can be sure to like us, follow us, maybe support us on Patreon. Whatever floats your boat, we would like to be around for a long time to come. So give us some love. Today's guest is Duncan Goheen, and he comes to us from British Columbia, which is a little further north than I'd like to be in the wintertime, but it would be a great place to be now. He sent me quite a bio, and he and I have had a conversation previously, but I'm going to cut to the chase just with a few highlights and let him fill in the details for you. One of the things that I found interesting is that at age 12, he was flying airplanes, and he got his license, his pilot's license, by the time he was age 16. So that's pretty fascinating. He's obviously out there and a risk taker and a guy who flies high. He's taught college. He's worked a lot with First Nations leaders for several years. He's been in business for decades. He's a member of Rotary, and I always like to give a shout out to Rotary because I'm also a member of Rotary. And one thing he and I have in common is going overseas to do a mission trip, and a trip that was also related to providing clean water to people who need it. He's got a bachelor's degree in economics, a master's of science degree in community development and social sciences, and a Ph.D. in human behavior. Now, I found his thesis to be pretty fascinating. He interviewed the founding leaders of NGOs that made significant contributions to human health and well-being to find out what their common denominators for success was. And I'll let him tell you what that was. I won't go any deeper into that. And he runs an organization now called Global Healthy. So, Duncan, as I prepped you, you know that our format is we start with your childhood, work up to the present day, and then I'll ask you some questions. So the mic is all yours.
Okay. Thanks very much, Bob. Well, I guess starting with my childhood, I was born on a mountain. How's that? I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, on the mountain. For people in that part of the world will know what I'm talking about there. I guess maybe the most salient things in terms of childhood, I'm a small town boy. I was raised in a small town called Dundalk, which is an hour and a half out of Toronto, a small rural community. And town where everybody knew each other. My maternal grandparents lived next door. My paternal grandparents had a farm about 6 miles out of town, and so it was a close community, close relationships there. In terms of the spiritual journey, I guess my grandparents on my dad's side were very devout Christians, and when I'd go and visit, they would take me to church, and so I got quite a bit of exposure to that side of things early on, and that eventually led to I was called to the ministry actually in my early 20s, and served as a lay minister for 25 years. Part time of that as pastor and so on. But going back to childhood, my grandparents on the other side, who lived adjacent to us, my mom's folks, uh, were Jewish immigrants from Russia in the early 1900s, and so were quite devout in their spiritual life, and so I was exposed to the Jewish traditions and the Christian as I was growing up, and as a matter of fact, still maintain um, deep relationships in Christian communities and Jewish community as well. So that's a little bit of history on that side of it. Um, as I was always curious as a young person. I can remember having what I would call mystical experiences. Oh, when I was in my early teens, I can still remember being out in the night sky, just feeling a tremendous presence about me that was very powerful, very strong. It was just very, very deep feeling. So I had no doubt when I was growing up of of the fact that I was a spiritual being. This was sort of, I was sort of raised in that, and I had no, I believed in the miracles that were taught in terms of Christ's life and that sort of thing, but frankly, I had no idea how they happened. I believe that. Yeah, do I believe it happened? Yes. Do I know how it happened? No, I didn't know how it happened, but I did believe it was real. And I did believe when Christ said that anything you've seen me do, you can do, and you can do even greater things. I believe that then, I believe that now. And so those have been threads that have been very important, I guess, in my development. When I was, I've gone to school quite a bit, with bachelor's and master's and Ph.D. and so on. But particularly in the master's program, I was in the master's program in social work, and I worked with psychiatric outpatients, and it was with a team of psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers. And I came away from that feeling that everybody had the best intentions, but at the end of the day, we really didn't know a lot about what we were doing. Frankly, the default was drugs at the end of the day, and so for me, that was very unsatisfactory. And so I took some different paths at that time, and moved out of that particular work. But it was interesting because you mentioned, I was doing work with Rotary International, and we had our own charities as well. So I was doing work in the Philippines, and I headed up projects there. I represented Canadian Rotary in the Philippines. That was at the time when Marcos was deposed, and Aquino was coming in, and before I went to the Philippines, I talked to, I'm trying to remember his name, a psychologist at UBC. I'll think of his name in a minute. But anyway, I said, who should I talk to in the Philippines, in terms of spiritual journeys and so on? And he said, go and see Jimmy Lacaucau. And Jimmy Lacaucau had written 5 books on psychic surgery, which I knew nothing about. Anyway, that was the start of it was Lee Poulos, Dr. Lee Poulos from the University of British Columbia, because Lee had spent quite a bit of time. So he said, check that out. That'll be an interesting interesting journey for you. And so I did, and I began to understand for the first time, really. Even though the church I was in and was lay minister in, and we practiced laying on of hands and so on and so forth. But when I was in the Philippines, there was another whole layer of reality that I was exposed to that really changed things significantly. I felt going away from that. Here I am. I've been going to school, trying to be a responsible citizen, trying to prepare myself, to do meaningful work in the world. Trying to follow my faith as best I can. But I really felt like I was in a game that had 52 cards to play the game, and I'd been dealt three of them.
Yeah.
I felt totally inadequate. That my reality, like I was looking at reality through a little tiny keyhole, and that keyhole was one I'd been educated in, trained in, and so on and so on. But I just, I felt, I really, really didn't know a whole lot, and which was true. I still don't know a whole lot, but I know a tiny bit more than I did then. But anyway, I guess to carry on from that, doing some deep meditation and exploring power of mind and doing a lot of studies in terms of Steiner and Edgar Cayce and Walter Russell and a lot of people, who are contemporary doing incredible work, sort of expanded my horizons. And then one time I was doing some meditation. As a matter of fact, it was in a cave and it was in hot springs and it was very, very hot. It was like 104 degrees. So initially you could only go in for 2 or 3 minutes and you had to come out again. It was just a very small area that you could sort of fit into. If you were claustrophobic, it wasn't a place to go. And anyway, I was in there and I spent several days, and each time you spend a little more time. So eventually I was in a pretty altered state where I could spend several hours, and I was running through some scales because I did a lot of vocal work and just part of what I was doing. And as I was meditating, all of a sudden I hit one particular sound, and it was like the lights came on. It was like and it didn't matter how small I tried to make that sound, it just kept echoing out tremendous over the valley. And it was a deep mystical experience. And I spent several days with that sound, and later found that had tremendous curative effect, which I wasn't anticipating. I was just using it as a meditation tool, technique, support, or whatever. I found that it was another whole language, all on its own. And it was coming very, very strongly. And so there was 2 or 3 days there that I had. It was just all I can do is describe it as a deep mystical experience. There was angelic beings. There was a lot of things happening. It was a life-changing event, to say the least. And so I've carried on with that, and we may talk a little bit more about that later. But later in the Philippines, because I went back and forth a lot in the Philippines, so we found there was particular work being done there in the energy field, and it was pranic healing. And there was schizophrenia that was being treated successfully in like 6 months with no drugs. And that just blew my mind, given the training and exposure that I'd had before, because, schizophrenia, for anybody that's in the mental health field, you're dealing with some pretty serious mental health issues. But I found that there was systems and techniques that had been developed to be able to deal with this, cleansing the energy centers, balancing, energizing, and so on. And so I thought, okay, I've got to investigate this. So my wife Marilee and I went to see Master Choa Kok Sui. He's Filipino, but he's a Chinese by descent. And so he had developed this system called pranic healing. And so we went to see him. And so we traveled we were in Manila, and it was like hot. And we were in a cab. You could see through the floorboards, and the air was such that it was hard to breathe. So by the time we arrived at this place, we were anything but what I'd call an optimal spiritual state. It was more a survival state. So we come into this room, and there was 40 or 50 people there. As a matter of fact, most of them were nuns dressed in habit that were there for treatment, which was quite an interesting situation. Anyway, as soon as I come in, I introduced ourselves. He said, we've heard about your work. We're here to learn what you're doing and just observe. So he turned and he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, we're just here to learn and observe and so on. And he wouldn't let go of that. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And I said, well, I use sound. I use sound. And he said, well, go ahead and do it then. Use it. I was like, normally when I do that, I spend time meditating and I spend time preparing, to be what we'll call in an optimal state, which I wasn't in. But anyway, I had no choice. He insisted. So I did. So it's the harmonic overtones that I generate. So I did that for maybe 3-4 minutes. And a person from the back of the room come running up. He was crying. He said, I've been healed. I'm healed. I said, what are you talking about, Master Cho? Said, well, this morning I was in the hospital for chronic emphysema. I couldn't breathe. And he said, with the sound, he said, I could open up, I could breathe, I could free, and that sort of thing. So Master Cho turned to a fellow beside him. His name is Mung Mike. Mung is like Uncle Mike. And Mung Mike is a great big guy. He was well over 300 pounds. And I didn't know at the time that Mung Mike was maybe the most gifted clairvoyant on the planet. He could not only see the energy centers, he could see the colors, he could see the directions of spin, he could see the size and so on and so forth. It was absolutely amazing. And Master Cho was using him for feedback, because as he was doing treatment, he would get feedback from this Mung Mike as to what was happening. Master Cho himself was very intuitive and clairvoyant and so on, but Mung Mike was a second opinion. So Mung Mike said to him, well, everybody's chakras around the room, they were cleansed, they were balanced. He said, everybody around the room. So Master Cho turned to me and he said, well, you don't need the pranic. He said, use that sound, record it, get it out to the world, and so on. And I said, well, the fact of the matter is with the pranic, you've got books, you've got courses, and so on, that we can teach people, and so on. So I said, I'll do the sound, but we need to learn the pranic as well. So we did that. We took on the pranic, we learned it, and then we brought it to Canada, my wife, Marilee, and I, and Master Nona as well. So it's now across the country. So then what happened was, with specific treatments with pranic, there's treatments for, about everything you can imagine in terms of mental health, physical health. So he then integrated that with the sonic. And so there's two parts to the sonic. One is like an invocation, where there is an invocation for spiritual healing. And that generates an energy that enables that process. But then beyond that, there's a very specific energy treatment that follows the pranic protocol that's embedded in another soundtrack so that a person can actually get the full treatment with that. So anyway, in terms of the spiritual evolution and treatment, as you know, you know Edgar Cayce really well, his story and his history, and I know you've taught a lot of his work. The work that Cayce has done, the work that Steiner has done, the work that Walter Russell, like we are such powerful spiritual beings. Like so I study, and still like the Bible, like it still speaks deeply to me, and some of the Coptic Gospels, Mary Magdalene and so on, they speak deeply to me. And so when I'm in that state of oneness, I know, we are infinite beings. We have all power. We have all knowing. But the challenge is the conditioning that we've pretty well all been exposed to, and that it's like we don't have to do anything to bring in this power, if you will. It's there. We just in many ways have to get out of the way. and it's a lot easier said than done. But anyway, so I don't know, Bob. Maybe if that's maybe that's a long enough talk on that side of it.
Well, I'm sure that for my audience, probably a number of questions come to mind. Uh, but I've got some questions just based on my own background. Uh, and somebody I interviewed on this podcast learned to do third eye surgery, and she offers that as part of her offerings to the public. So when you said that you got introduced to somebody who did psychic surgery, could you explain either what that is or at least your understanding of what that is?
Okay, you asked for it.
Yeah, I did.
So here's the story. Jimmy Lukauko, who I mentioned, he worked for Manila Times, and he's MBA type, but he the 5 books on psychic surgery. So I said to him, "What is this stuff? Is it real? Is it fake? Because I've heard all kinds of things. And he said yes, and I said, "Well, that's very helpful." He said it's real and it's fake. He said there's real psychic surgery going on, but he said the problem is that when it got to be well known, people were filling jet aircraft, 737s, to come here for surgery. And he said people that did it, he said traditionally if people would do the psychic surgery, but when they needed regeneration, they needed recharging, they'd go to the mountains, they'd recuperate, they'd regenerate, and when they were ready, they'd come back down and they would do their work. But he said, you got aircraft lined up coming in. He said, it doesn't allow that kind of schedule. So he said, people ended up doing this even when they weren't in the condition to do it. And then he said there started to be sleight of hand happening and that sort of thing. But he said, yeah, there's real stuff happening. He said, go and see Gary Magno. And Gary Magno was on a street called Rotary Center, as a matter of fact, in Manila. So I went to see Gary Magno. So you walk in, and there's a desk, and then there's chairs, and then there's like a wall with a glass, a big glass window, and behind that, it's just like a operating table. So there's people sitting in the chairs, and then there's on the other side of the wall the operating table. And so when you come in, you sign in, and why are you there, and what's your ailment, and so on. And then they take you one at a time, and it simply, or you come in according to the order that you come in on. You're taken in the order you come in on. So I just signed in, and I said, I'm just here to observe, what's going on, and so on. And so they said, fine, go ahead, have a chair. So I'm watching these people. They come in and they lay down on this table, usually stripped from the waist up, maybe have a pair of shorts on, that sort of thing. That's about it. Men and women, and then the Gary Magno's on the other side of the screen. Well, I should back up. Even before the whole thing starts, they start just with a little kind of, maybe reading of some scriptures and that sort of thing. There's a lot of Christian, there's a lot of, Christ and Mary and so on, statues around and that sort of thing. So it's a kind of Christian artifacts around. So anyway, initially there's just a bit of reading scripture, that sort of thing, not very much. And then they start the work. So people come in and lay down on the table. Gary does a brief prayer. Then he takes a white sheet it just looks like a cotton sheet, maybe about the size of a tea towel kind of thing. And he holds that up and he's running that back and forth over the person. And so I didn't know at the time what he was doing, but later I found out that it was like an X-ray machine. He was using that like an X-ray machine. So it was like an X-ray for him to see what was going on inside the person's body. And so after he'd done that, he would then just bare hands, okay? Imagine you've got a pail of water in front of you, and your hands are above the water, and your hands go straight into the water. That's what he did with the human body. Straight into the body. Depending, so if he was stripping varicose veins, he'd be into the body. He'd be stripping varicose veins in the body.
Now you observed this.
He'd be removing, if there was tumors, growth, or whatever from the body, taking it out, putting it in a pail over here, and so like my circuits are getting overloaded, to say the least, at that point, because everything I knew about reality was being denied in front of me. It was like, it's happening, but it's not happening. This can't be happening, My final undoing was when a lady laid down on the table and he put his hand over her eye and removed it and had it in his hand. And that's when I lost it. I was sitting there, and the next thing I knew, there was a circle of people. I was looking up at a circle of people looking down at me, because I had fainted and fallen on the floor.
My goodness. And
I'm looking up, and they thought I'd had a heart attack or something,
Yeah.
But it was just like, because with the eye, like everything else was crazy, but the eye, that was,
Yeah.
I talked later to that lady. I said, tell me your story. She said, I've been coming here. This is the third time. And she said, I was pretty well totally blind. And each time my eyesight's getting better. And now I can see pretty well. They're doing treatment on the eyes, So there was anyway, I talked to Gary later, and I said, so it ended up, I did like pretty well a 1-year apprentice with this guy on this stuff. And it was an amazing journey. One of the times I was in there, there was a TV crew from Chile Broadcasting Corporation, and they were there to film. And so they came to me and they said, we want to film you. And I said, what do you mean? Well, we want you to go in, because I did have some sinus congestion and I did have a few things, They said, we want to film you there, I said, okay, on one condition, that I get a copy of the video, because it's broadcast quality video. They said, okay. So I did. And I've got the video, but he went in and he actually cleaned out sinuses here. Like it was all of a sudden like somebody opened a window for breathing. Like I didn't know there was so much restriction until the restrictions were gone. And then he went in the carotid artery and did clean out there as well, and a few other things. But anyway, I've never shared this story publicly before,
Well, audience, you've heard it first.
I haven't talked about it. So. Anyway, that's that. But and the upshot of it was after I knew it was real and so on and so forth, he would wake up at 3 a.m. and he would know everybody that was coming the next day and what needed to be done and so on and so forth. And then next day, those people would show up and so on and so forth. That was just part of his routine. And but anyway, after I did the apprenticeship and the work and that sort of thing, it was sort of like, okay, now what? You go home and do that, and you're in jail, like right now. You cannot practice surgery without a license, and you certainly can't go into the body like that.
Yeah.
And so the pranic healing is non-touch, so you don't have to touch the body. So from the medical perspective, it's not real. It doesn't exist. It doesn't matter anyway. So what can these crazy people do? That they're not doing any harm.
Right.
But to go into the body, because some of the psychic surgeons have come over here and have gotten in trouble doing that work. So
you say he's written 5 books on this?
Jimmy LeCowcow, yeah. Now those, whether they're still in print or not, I've got them. Yeah. But it's a history of it. Like I talked to Gary Magno. I said, how did this start for you? And he said, first of all, in my community where I was raised, it was north of Manila. There's a particular community where a lot of these psychic surgeons came from. And he said, so psychic surgery for me was a reality when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But he said, I never had anything to do with it. But he said, when I was 12 years old, he said, there was somebody working on a roof and they fell off the roof. And he said, I went over to help them. He said, all of a sudden, I found myself doing this. And he said, I was in as much shock as anybody else.
Yeah.
But he said, one of my aunts who was very familiar with all this stuff said, Gary, this is what you need to be doing. You have a calling for this. You have a capability for this. And so he said from that time on, then he started to open up to the idea of it, and then he embraced it, and then he went into it full time, and so on. So, but there's a particular small area that a lot of these people come from, but it's it's quite amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine people flying in from all over the world to participate in this.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, but because there's so many areas we could get into. So anyway, tell me about Global Healthy and
Global Healthify.
Yeah. That's
so
right.
We've been running
Global Healthify, right? Okay.
Global Healthify.
How did that come about, and what's it doing lately?
Okay, so Global Healthify. So we started clinics. When I say we, my wife Marilee and I started clinics in Victoria, British Columbia, back in the 90s. And so we had clinics and we had a lot of people come in. So whether people had, there was a lot of, we did a lot of mental health treatment, depression, stress, anxiety, breathing disorders, heart, pretty well the full gamut. And we had a medical doctor on staff. Dr. Peter Nunn was with us, who did a lot of work. He did a lot of work with water and with the qualities of water and that sort of thing. So we did treatment work. We used the pranic treatment, and we taught, and then we used the sonic. And now there's over 50 sonic programs. People have heart issues. We have people have been going in for back surgery, used it, and all of a sudden, there's so much that's possible, with the sound, that we could talk about. But anyway, we use that as well. But then trauma treatment. My wife Marilee will be teaching trauma treatment to teachers and so on, because we've trained a lot of teachers. So we do a lot of training of people that want to do alternative health work, but want to do effective work. Like one of the problems we had was people would take a weekend workshop, and then the next weekend they were a practitioner. They'd hang their
Yeah.
shingle out. Oh, we know this, we can do it. It's like, okay, there's a protocol, there's a step-by-step training and process to do this. So we did. I can remember we did a session in Victoria. We opened it up. We said, and we had Master Choro Koksui there as well, and we had people lined up. They'd come from the hospitals. They're lined up with catheters and IVs and everything else uh, to have treatment, and it was quite amazing. But so we've trained a lot of mental health practitioners, psychiatrists, and so on. The problem with a lot of the psychiatry, for example, is they almost have to do it under the table, because if it's they
Right.
can't they get into trouble. The same thing with Dr. Peter Nunn, who is a medical doctor. He was in trouble all the time with the College of Physicians and Surgeons,
Yeah.
because he would say, okay, we can follow this path, but if we want to get to the root, we have to do this other. But it wasn't in the College of, the College of Physicians and Surgeons
Yeah.
treatment protocols and so on. So anyway, today we do distant work, working with individuals, with groups. We train locally and at a distance. We find the distance makes no difference if people are 2 feet away or 2,000 miles away, because on that level. And Bill Tiller, I don't know if you know Dr. Bill Tiller or know of him, but he was at Stanford. He was the head of department head of material science, and he demonstrated the distance work scientifically, and he said this is going to change the way science thinks and does its work. But even though his methods were rigorous, and he showed he could increase or decrease the pH of water simply through meditation and implanting that thought, if you will,
Yeah.
into matter, to be able to demonstrate the relationship in matter, because science needs matter, but no matter how rigorous his work was, it was not accepted. And he was a Ph.D. at the University of Toronto in physics, but he went to Westinghouse and he headed up their program for 10 years. And then Stanford said, we got to have you here. So it's like, until the blinders come off, like it doesn't matter what you present. If people have blinders on, they're not going to see it.
Yeah.
And poor Tiller ran into that. And so we say now, we're not here to convert anybody. We're not here to convert. If you are open, and if you want to follow this path, we're to help. Here to help and support you, and we'll do that. But we're not here to convert.
Yeah.
We tried. We're not here to do that.
So would you repeat that doctor's name? That
Dr. William Tiller, Tiller. He's well known, and I have a whole library of his work. But you'll see where he's rigorously done his homework to show that the pH of water could be increased or decreased through intention, really. But it was deep meditation from his wife and himself and some others,
Right.
and they demonstrated that, and it cannot be refuted. He talked to me about things that could be, put in the hospitals, to counteract, all of the diseases that are generated within the hospital, iatrogenic and that sort of thing. But it was rejected, because it just went against the grain, of too many people, too many vested interests.
Yeah, it's that old saying is believing is seeing, and it just depends on what you believe as to what you're open to and what you can see.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because so many things can just shatter our beliefs and then we don't know where to go. So we just
yeah,
hold on to them.
yeah. And that's frankly why I fainted in the midst of that psychic surgery, because everything I'd been taught, was being
Uh,
denied,
yeah.
and those two things didn't work together. They don't fit, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why I said the 52 cards and the 3 cards, and it was like so I've been trained in the physical, the material, but this other realm,
Yeah.
I had faith in it, but I didn't know how to function in it, you
Right.
know.
Right. Yeah, I know people who have experienced Reiki and felt that the person had reached their hand in through their body.
Yeah,
When, as you're watching, their hands are not even touching their body, it's above the body, but the
yeah,
person experiences it as going into their body.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. And it can be in the etheric field, it could be in the astral field, which interpenetrates the physical and is the template for the physical. We can see issues occurring in the energy field before they're manifest in the physical. So, what
yeah,
better preventative medicine is there than that?
right.
You can scan, you can see, oh, there's something developing here, clean that up, and they never manifest on the physical level. I
Yeah,
talk about preventative medicine. That's the
right.
ultimate in preventative medicine.
For
You know,
sure. Yeah,
don't wait till it gets in the physical.
yeah,
And the same thing with stress. We deal with stress and anxiety. Are the root of. I won't. I won't use percentages here, but I'll say 90% or more of physical mental health issues. Stress and anxiety do get shut down, and then the chakras get out of balance and the body's unable to function
yeah,
properly. And then the weakest link goes. So one person can have the same stress as another, but it manifests differently because of their system. One has a weak link in one area, one has a weak link in another. That's where it manifests.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you were in business for a while and probably had colleagues who were business people. Uh, do you still maintain relationships with those colleagues, or have they all decided that you've gone off the deep end and they can't deal with you?
So yes and no is the answer. Some in that category, and some in the former.
Yeah,
People say, this is the way business is done. No, no, no. It's not the way business is done. It's the way you do business. So some
yeah,
people do business, that are spiritually aware, spiritually guided, and so on. Other people do business strictly out of greed and so on. It's the way the people do business. So it's the individual, the business in and of itself. We're trained, to be very sort of Machiavellian, and to, you know, with the Harvard Business School and so on. The early training, was a war model. It was a
yeah,
win lose, and as opposed to win win. And that's a huge subject that you bring up in terms of business and economics, because that creates an environment that's the environment that most of us live in. It's the world around us and our work and so on and so forth. And we need to be creating environments that are win-win environments that foster and nurture the spirit and the soul, that are soul developing, as opposed to soul shrinking. And so many young people now are starting to get that.
yeah,
They're starting to get that. They're saying, we're seeing the older generations, and we don't like what we see there. We don't like that energy and what it's done to them and to the planet. We don't like that. So they need new models and new support for that, for those initiatives. That's so huge. There's 2 areas we're working on right now. One is One is the spiritual healing. So I've got a website, experiencespiritualhealing.com. So you can go there and look at that, experiencespiritualhealing.com. And they've got an assessment there. Are you ready for spiritual healing? And people can do an assessment there for that. But so one is the healing, but the other one is geniusing, spiritual geniusing. So we're all here for a purpose. None of us are here by accident. We're all here for a purpose. We all have genius. We all have a built-in genius within us. And when we're aware of that and respond to that calling.
Yeah. So what's the name of that website again?
Experience Spiritual Healing.
No, I got that one. What's the other one?
Well, that's the new website.
Oh, that's the new, okay.
ExperienceSpiritualHealing.com. And we'll probably do another one called the Geniusing one, but we'll have links in there. But it's the two areas. One is the healing, but the other is the geniusing. And that's where so many people, they know they're here for a purpose, but they know that in many ways they're not living that life that they deep down know they should be living and want to live. That where they'll thrive and access the power, the energy, and the intelligence that's there. You know, that's what Edgar Casey did. He had a genius. He recognized it. He worked in it. And look at the work that he did. We can all do that in our own calling. We can all do that. That infinite intelligence is there. That's one of my main two programs. One is the spiritual healing. The other is the spiritual genius, and they go together. That sometimes the healing, you know, if things need to be corrected or cleaned up, or there's traumas or whatever, deal with that. And then the geniusing for others, they're ready for the geniusing like right now. Yeah. And the world is critical need for that, just critical need for that right now. And that power is there. And all the issues that we're facing on the planet right now, we can solve them. We can deal with them only with the infinite intelligence, the infinite power, because it's there. We simply need to access it. I say simply, it's not so simple, but we can do it. We're there.
Well, I'm with you on that. Okay, we have actually come to the end of our time. And as I warned you in advance, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to just leave the audience with whatever words of wisdom you would like to leave them with. Although you just did leave us with some important words. Yeah. So the question is, do you have a few more?
Well, I would say the most important thing is to know that no matter what the problem is, mental health, physical health, or whatever, don't give up. Some people give up. Some people have no hope. Yeah. There's always hope. There's no situation that cannot be effectively treated. None, bar none. So just keep that hope, because that is a fact. The second piece is that geniusing you have within you, that power, that intelligence, that capability to do incredible things for yourself, for your family, for the planet. And it's critically needed today. And I just strongly, strongly encourage you to know that and to fully embrace it and do whatever you have to do to fully live that genius that you really are and that you're created to be and that you really are deep down.
Terrific. I love that message. It's been so nice spending this time with you and getting to know you. Just keep up the good work. So audience, as always, take what resonates with you, put the rest on the shelf because you may want to bring it down later when you're ready for it. So until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.